directions. Directions. Sometimes the most simple directions get all confused. We're messed up, mixed up, don't quite understand, and we may not wind up at the right place. There are a few things that my son said when he was growing up that always seem to recur. I keep remembering from time to time. Things happen that cause me to remember that he said these things. One came to mind this week as I was preparing this lesson. He said one time, "Dad, how is it that when we're going somewhere and we stop and ask for directions, they always tell us how to get there, and then they say, 'You can't miss it,' but we do." Directions are kind of peculiar that way, and different people give them in different directions, different ways themselves. But I want us this morning to look at the issue, and you can look at it from a personal perspective, or you can look at it as a congregation. I'm going to be looking primarily from a congregational perspective, and it's a little bit related to the first lesson of the year, but I want us to talk about the issue of where are we going? Where are we going? If we all get up on our horse and ride off in different directions and nobody knows where we're going, where will we wind up? It won't be the same place. So we need to think about where are we going, and we need to make sure that we're all going the same place and we're going to the same pace, and we're sticking together and doing the things that God wants us to do. Where do you think that we're going? In a moment, I'm going to go to a passage that was real curious in lots of ways, but a place where Jesus gave the apostles some directions that they just couldn't grasp. But let me tell you a story first. It was a weekend before a vacation. Now, I don't know, if you've never been a full-time preacher, you probably are not aware that the greatest way in the world to cause trouble for somebody in the congregation is to plan a vacation. But it happens. I was to have left on vacation on Sunday night after church on a given Sunday. But you see, an awful tragedy happened in one of our families. It wasn't an outside thing, it was something that happened internally. This young couple, 2 sweet children, it was too important that I stay and spend some time with them. And so it was late Monday night before the journey began. I drove the family, and we went out through Lubbock and ate breakfast with some people the next morning there. Drove to Albuquerque, then there had to buy a battery. Then up north toward Pagosa Springs, and by the time we got to Pagosa Springs, it was 10 o'clock at night. And I was tired. We began to look for a room. There was none available. It was summer. People were in Colorado. We went on from there to Durango, and there was no room. We went to Cortez, and there was no room, by which time I had to say, I can't drive any further. Someone else said, well, I can drive. What should I do? Where should I go? And I said simply, go west until you get to Highway 199, then head toward Moab. If I'm not awake by Moab, you awaken me. And I went to sleep. About 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, I was awakened with the news, I think we're lost. I asked a dumb question. I said, where are we? Lost people don't know where they are. What should we do? What should we do? Now we're down to a quarter of a tank of gasoline. And I said, I guess just keep driving until we could recognize something. And so I began to see 2 kinds of things, young people. I began to see cattle guards. Now, cattle guards in that part of the country are not men with big hats and 6-shooters riding horses, but they're things in the road to keep cattle from changing one part of the range to another, and they go burp, 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 like wake up things on the side of the road. And we hit a lot of those, and you know, they're not really in populated areas usually. And I began to read names of communities. I wouldn't call these towns, but I've gone back and looked to see what was the closest ones to where we were. There was Danini Station and Mexican Water and Cayenta and Shonto and Tenali, and they weren't on my map that I was using then. Finally, found something that recognized, and sure enough, the direction had been followed almost precisely. We had driven west till we got to 199. Only thing was, instead of heading toward Moab, the option was to go south. And now we were in Arizona and headed west on a little county road with a quarter of a tank of gas. So we turned around. We did get to Moab and we did buy gas. But when I think about being lost, I remember that kind of situation. When I think about the issue of, do you know where we're going? That's about as lost as I've ever been. In the dark at that hour of the night and not knowing. But Jesus said something to the apostles that made them feel about that lost, I think. And the passage is very, very familiar to us. John 14, in the first several verses, in the first paragraph there, John tells us that Jesus started out by reassuring them, let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. And he said, I go to prepare a place for you that you may be where I am. If it were not true, I wouldn't have told you. And so I go to prepare this place for you. And he said, you know the way. You know where I'm going, and you know the way. And immediately, Thomas said, Lord, we don't know where you're going, and we sure don't know the way. What do you mean? And Jesus answered in a way that to us seems relatively simple, but it must have been confounding to them, because Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no man comes to the Father except by me. They said, but what do you mean? How do we? Jesus said, I've been with you all this time, and do you not yet know? Philip said, well, just show us the Father. Then we'll know. Jesus said, don't you understand? If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. It's all such a mystery to them at that point in life, at that point in the ministry. It was early and they didn't get it yet, and so they're confounded, although they have the directions. When he says, you just follow me. But in order for us to get to the places that we need to be, there are some things that are critically important. We have to have a vision of the place we're going, where it is, maybe on the map, what it's like in terms of circumstances when we get there, so that we can recognize it. We've got to have that vision, we've got to have that understanding, and we have to understand the mission and the direction by which we're going to get there. We studied recently about the issue of blindness. We talked about these passages where the Apostle Peter in 2 Peter chapter 1, when he's talking about all the Christian graces, and he wound up by saying, if these things be in you and abound, you'll never be unprofitable or unfruitful. But he said, those who do not do this, who don't grasp this, the ones who are not understanding the principles of the prospects of real mature Christian living, he said they are nearsighted. And they cannot see afar. They can't see the direction. They are blind and they cannot see. In Matthew chapter 15, 14, Jesus said to the apostles that if the blind lead the blind, they both fall into the ditch. And there's a parable that he taught in Luke chapter 6, beginning in verse 39, where he told the story beginning with the proposition of the blind leading the blind. It's obvious to us, and the meaning of that is that there's going to be disaster. There's going to be catastrophe. Whenever you follow people who don't know where they are going or who are going in the wrong directions because they are deluded, the end is going to be disastrous. And so the Lord gave us in the church, He gave us spiritual leadership. He gave us men in congregations that are to be the shepherds, the one who set the way. They are the ones who are called the elders. They are the ones who are called the bishops in some cases, and they are the ones who are the pastors, and they are the ones who are those shepherds. And it is their responsibility to provide the spiritual guidance, the spiritual leadership, to hold out before the congregation the answer to the question, where are we going? But not just the question, where are we going? But it falls upon them to also be able to explain the very, very critical question of how do we propose to get there? What's the methodology? What's the route that we will be taking? Tell us, lead us, show us. That becomes their spiritual call. Ira North, you may remember his name from the 1970s particularly, as he was a great guy preaching during those days and leading many people to the Lord. Ira North had a story that he told in one of his sermons or one of his books. I've not been able to trace exactly where I first either heard it or read it, but he told the story of one of those country stores. I don't see as many of them around here as I've seen back in the South. Back in the South, there are lots of just stores that are out in the small communities where people, instead of, as you might in the urban area, run to something like don't have 7-Eleven here, but that kind of shop where you get a little bit of everything but not much of anything, and you get that instead of going to the big store. Well, this keeps them from going into town, and so there are community stores, often general stores, sometimes not so much. But in days past, almost all those had a bench that was out in front. Sometimes there were two, one on either side of the entry door. Those benches were there for a reason, because George and Tom and Howard and all of the different guys of the community who, frankly, didn't work anymore, but like to see people, would come and station themselves. I guess Walmart's got a place kind of like that, don't they? And they'd sit in the front, and often they whittled, and sometimes they spit, and they talked to you. Mark, you've seen them, haven't you? You didn't do that. But and so they talk about everything that's going on. And they've always got a subject because there's always people coming and going, see? So they get to talk about that. And that's the way it is. And so one of those stores, the guys were all like birds out there on their seat. And they noticed something unusual in that there were, I'll call it a string of cars that all went through obviously together. Now the lights weren't on, so it was not like it was a funeral procession in terms of purpose, but yet that's the way that the cars were just all together. Obviously, they were going somewhere together. They wonder who those folks are. Wonder where they're going. Maybe somebody made up a story. I don't know. About 30 minutes later, so our story goes, a man came flying in, not literally, but screeching in his car, slid to a stop right in front of the bench, jumped out and said, "Have you guys seen a whole bunch of cars together going past here? Have you seen a parade of people are going past here?" And they said, "Yes, as a matter of fact, about a half hour ago, a group like that went through and we wondered about it." He said, "Oh, good, I've got to catch them because I'm their leader." So very often, more in church maybe than in some other areas, it's almost like that. When we get a situation and it seems like that the tail's wagging the dog, and the leaders may in fact, or the people who have the responsibility, may not be caught up with where everybody else is, yet they still have the responsibility. And so when we're asking where we're going, it becomes time to look at leadership, and the other side of leadership is fellowship. Are they leading? Are we following? And if they're leading in this direction, we're not following, that means we're going somewhere else, and the unity and the harmony and the group accomplishment that we could have doesn't get achieved. Where we're going isn't in our mind. Where we're going isn't where we're going to be at the end of the day. And so we need to be sure that we're on the same page, so to speak. Leaders are generally perceived to be people who are out front, that are in fact leading. There's different kinds of leadership styles. Some people do it by ordering people around. They need to join the military, of course, because that's where you can do that. In today's world, it doesn't work so well out in the secular community. But still, there are some people who try to lead by telling you what to do and then check it up and make sure you've done it. And that's not always harmonious. There are other people who manage by walking around. You may have one of those even at school or at work where you are. The guy who just drifts around, and he may show up at your desk or where you're working with machinery at any given time, say a few words, visit, and go along. You always know he's there. He's somewhere close, but that's his style. There are others who do it by friendship mechanisms. They become close friends to everybody. They know who your children are, and your wife's name, your husband's name, and where they went to school, all those kinds of things, and they almost get like somebody you'd say, would you like to come over to dinner with my family? And that's the manager, the leader. Those different kinds of styles. Probably the best style is a combination of all the things put together, if somebody is intelligent enough to manage doing all of that. But still, the objective is to be leading. If no leading is happening, no following can occur. But if no following is occurring, no leading is occurring. That's how we can tell how that's working. Where are we going? How's this working for us? The concept that I'm talking about is one that's clearly suggested by the fact that God called these men shepherds. Where is a shepherd positioned in terms of the flock? The flock follows because the shepherd is out in the lead. It's also suggested by other terms that he used, like elder, and also as the term pastor or overseer. By these who lead being the overseers and the ones who challenge and the ones who are out front. It's conspicuous as to how God chose these words to discuss the function that they would have. And therein lies the challenge so far as that's concerned. We got some real good examples on this matter. You know, if you're looking for a leader, if you're looking for a perfect leader, I suggest God, because God's been leading this universe from the beginning, hasn't he? And he has it all under control. That's the great supervising model. But if you're looking for one that goes along with that, I suggest Jesus. And that's what Jesus was talking about in John chapter 14. Follow me. Follow me. I'll lead you where you need to go. If any man will come to the Father, he said, it has to be through me because I am the way, the truth, and the life. Just follow me and I'll get you to where you need to be. There are others that God brought forward in the Bible. There's Nehemiah. I guess I've got no greater favorite in leadership than the great man Nehemiah, rebuilding the walls of the city of Jerusalem. There's John the Baptist in the New Testament. There's Moses, just all the way through. But this is the job that he gave those who serve as the leaders in the church. That's not confined strictly to elders who are shepherds and bishops and pastors, but it also moves to those who serve as deacons. That word means servant. And those who teach, and those who encourage, and those who parent. All together, God calls us to follow Jesus so that we lead our family, and with that we lead our community. And he gives us what we need to be able to accomplish that, providing the spiritual food in the church, the Word of God, the foundation, I am the Christ, the Son of the living God, a solid basis that this is from God and is God's way and it's what we're supposed to be about. And then protection. You see, a dad in the household is supposed to provide food, shelter, and in today's world it seems to become more and more important, and protection for his family. I didn't know that a day would come in the Lord's church whenever I would have to point out specifically what is obvious, that the leaders in the Lord's church on the local basis now have the responsibility to feed by making sure that the gospel is being taught right, a responsibility to nurture so that people would stay faithful in the kingdom, but also to physically take measures to protect the congregation from harm when the congregation is assembled. We live in the age when that responsibility falls also to the leaders of the church. Where are we going here? In a day when we are susceptible to danger from without, if there's a plan, if there's an intention, if there is a protocol, but we're not familiar with it, it won't help us. If we're not trained in it, it won't help us. If it's in theory only in the minds of the leadership, it won't help you. But if it's provided and you don't listen, the leaders can't help you. We are a composite, a congregation, a body, a family, who hopefully are moving all in the same direction and who are provided the protection that we need, a safe haven for our souls and for our bodies and for our families. For heaven's sake, God, help us that we may be who you want us to be, going where we need to go. As for the church leaders, they have to be willing. I'm not here today to debate 1 Timothy chapter 3 about that being one of the qualifications. I frankly think that that's a statement of fact, that if a man desires to serve as an elder, he desires a good work, and that the qualifications begin after that. But if he doesn't want to serve, you wouldn't accomplish a thing by having him serve. And so in a sense, it is essential to be willing. Often, we may stress the importance of that willingness to the detriment of the next part of what is essential. It is one thing for someone to be willing to serve and lead, but the other part of that couple is he must be willing and able to serve. That includes the fulfilling of the qualifications that are given, but with practicality, beyond the things that are specified as to spiritual qualities, there is suggested in what we have experienced the need for a shepherd in the church to be able to identify the objective of what it is all about, to perceive it, to get it, who will reach the point that if he's asked, what is the church about, will be able to answer that question. Where are we going? What are we trying to accomplish? To be able to visualize how to get there. It's one thing for someone to say, I know what the objective of the church is, but when you say, well, how's it going to be accomplished? I don't have a clue. Like Philip, who says, Lord, I don't know where you're going. I don't know how to get there. And so many times, good guys in congregations of God's people today don't have a clue how to get there. They are willing, they are not able. He must be able to perceive or to sense the direction that he needs to go. Some people have a sense of direction so far as north, east, and south, and west, and some people are lost as a goose in a hailstorm. It's just, you drop them somewhere, and the sun could be shining straight over their shoulder going down in the afternoon. They don't know that's west. Or if they do, should I turn left or right? I don't do west and so, a while back I called a hotel where we were scheduled to stay, and I knew we were getting there after dark, and I said, if we're going west on Interstate 40 and we take exit, I'll not tell you just where it was, when we get to the street down there, should we go north or south? And the woman answering the phone said, sir, I'm sorry, I don't do directions. I wanted to say, how'd you get to work? I said, okay, let's try this another way. Do you turn left or right? You do left and right, don't you? And she knew left, and we found the place. Amazing that some people don't have any sense of direction. But I've met with elderships in the Lord's body that had no sense of direction. There were no goals, there were no ambitions. There were no directions. The church was just kind of moving along like a glob, and they didn't perceive. We're supposed to be leading these people toward heaven. He has to be able to dream, to imagine the ways to get there. Sometimes the ways to get there don't just smack you in the face. You have to have a brain and use it some, imagine some, and to make decisions that are important. Do you know that being able to make decisions, definitive decisions, is one of the most lacking things in our culture today? For so many people just amble through life. I call it sleepwalking. Never really dealing with the main important issues. But as Mr. Truman, I understand, I never visited his Oval Office, but they tell me he had a sign that sat before him on his desk that said, the buck stops here. And folks, wherever the elders meet, the buck stops there. God has given certain directions, and then in certain areas he's left it open to opinion. And when it's about opinion, as I understand it, the buck stops with the opinion that the most spiritually mature people in the congregation that ought to be the elders would make that decision. They're not all easy, folks. They're not all simple. No way. And elders sometimes don't know how to handle it. I had an interesting, to me, experience even in the course of this past week. When an elder called, and in the course of the conversation, I mentioned the fact that we just had an elders meeting, and he said, I got a question to ask you. Okay. He said, how do you decide things? What do you mean? How does the elders together decide, make decisions? Nobody had ever asked me that before. And then he went on to tell me about difficulties that were existing where he was, and the opinion of some that needed to bring outside resources or make a field trip to another place to listen to someone who tell them, a body of probably about 15 men, how to decide. And he was serious. How do you decide? And guys, I hope I represented you okay in that. But here's what I said. And I think that's important. Maybe this generated this sermon more than anything else. I don't know. But I think you, the family, need to know the answer to that question. How does the elders as a group make a decision? And the synopsis of what I told my friend was that, first of all, we envision an objective. We decide where we want to go. We decide what needs to be done. This is our objective. And then together, we try to create a vehicle that will get us from here to where we want to be. And when we all have agreed that's the vehicle that'll get us to the objective where we want to be, then we invest wholeheartedly in that vehicle. We fund it, we back it, we all get on it, and together we go to the objective. That's how we decide, and that's how we act upon the decision. I also was able to tell him something that you might find interesting. Since I've been in this congregation, of course, I've attended an elders meeting almost every week all that time. I say to the compliment of you having selected your elders and how they function, that I've never seen a vote on an issue in this church. The elders talk about issues until it is able to be verbalized in a way that all agree, then they move forward. There are no split decisions. I've never seen one. There might have been someday before 3 years ago, but I've never seen one. The harmony, the consistency that existed when it was 3 men, when it was 7 men, and now when it's 5 men, has continued. And we hope that always can be true. Because as the elders continue to be united, so also can the congregation. The church objectives have to be, number one, to take over where Jesus left off and carry forth. If you're trying to, in a few words, state where are we going, that's where we want to go. We want to go where Jesus left off. When Jesus left off, he left it directly to the apostles. We want to go right where the apostles were. And we want to preach the same things they preached. We want to teach the same way they taught. We want to worship the same way they worship. We want to help people who are in need in the same ways that we did. We want to be the church that Jesus died for. And as I said early in January, we want to be the church that Jesus would attend if he lived in Wichita. That's our objective. That's what this is about, and that's where we're trying to go. But you see, God has an objective for every one of us, not just us as a body, but an objective for each one of us. Just as he had an objective for Noah to build an ark and Abraham to build a nation, has he had an objective for Moses to lead the people of God out of Egypt, and as he had an objective for his people in the Old Testament, Jeremiah, he said, we quoted recently from chapter 29, verse 10 and following, I know the plans I have for you. He has an objective for us, everyone. He said it's for good things and not for bad. It's for life and not for death. I'm wishing the very best for you, everyone. There are a lot of methods to reach our objective, but there's just that one objective. There are many members who are equipped in different ways to reach the objective, to be part of that vehicle that gets us to the objective, but there's always just one body. And ours, each one of us individually, is to find our place and fill the gap. I like that phrase, fill the gap. It's used in the Bible several times. In Nehemiah chapter 4, whenever Nehemiah is talking about finishing the rebuilding of the wall, he talks about how his people stood in the gap. When they hadn't yet built all the wall and there's still gaps in it, men went and stood in that gap at night to keep anybody penetrating. When Ezekiel received the word of the Lord, spoken of about this kind of concept 2 times in chapter 13, the first 5 verses, he talked about how the prophets had not fulfilled the responsibility and they had gone around prophesying things that came out of their own mind. And consequently, God said, Israel is going to fold, it's going to be destroyed for that because I have warned you and no one has filled the gap. And over in chapter 22, verses 28 and following, he talks about how the gap had been left open and the city just exposed. He said the prophets themselves, who ought to be filling the gap and teaching the people and preparing and protecting the city through the word, they, he said, are like a bunch of jackals going through the ruins. They're picking up all, they're scavenging all that they can get from it. But nobody's protecting the city. We need to say, how can I fill the gap? Every man, woman, and child. If we're going to have a church that fulfills this objective, every one of us needs to grab our sword, our spear, our trowel, or whatever it is that we work with, and find us a gap, and find us a place that's not being fulfilled, a job that's not being done, and fill it, and everybody be involved if we're going to get where we're trying to go. How is that objective going to be achieved? I suggest that it is achieved first by understanding what the objective is. Men and boys, let me remind you that at 4 o'clock this afternoon we have a business meeting planned, and there are a good many very important ideas and things that are there to be reported, including the annual budget and some plans about protecting us here in this building and several other things. And you need to be there. We need you to be there. How can we inform you if you don't listen, if you don't come? Consider this afternoon, there's the gap. I guess had it been known the Chiefs would last this long into the season, might have been another time. But we didn't know, and that's when it is. So try to make up your mind. Which is more important? How that ball game comes out or whether we get to where we're going? Now, I hope you got enough spiritual maturity to know the right answer. But you need to be there. For your family's sake, you need to be there. Let me tell you something that's kind of an aside here on a personal basis, and you need to appreciate this, and it's probably not right if I didn't tell you. Leading that meeting this afternoon will be Brother Leroy Tice. He's the veteran among elders, the only one who's ever been through planning a budget before of those who currently are serving, and so he's leading it. I know that last night, in the period of 6:30 until 7 o'clock, Leroy Tice sat and he watched his daddy die. Today he's coming leading this meeting. If Leroy, one of our shepherds, can, having experienced what he experienced last night, get up today and come and fulfill his elder role in this church this afternoon, I think the very least the rest of us can do is set aside whatever else it was we might have done. Forget the car show. Come to this meeting. You see, it deals with where we're going, where we're going to get there. Engage the tools that are at our disposal. Pray with faith and be willing to take the faith chance. Just throw yourself into it with all confidence that this is going to work. Folks, we've got some history. We got 3 years. We've proved we're survivors. We've proven we're here and we're going to stay here. We're reaching the point now that people can say, that's not a church in danger. That's a church that's on the move. That's a church where people are being saved. That's a church where people are being taught. That's a church where I want to be a member. That's a church where I want my young people. They've got a youth ministry I want them to be exposed to. They've got teaching I want my children to hear. That's where we're going right now. Let's don't get sidetracked nor derailed. But let's take the faith challenge. Take the chance and give it all you got. Sacrifice to it as the greatest cause. Become so involved that it's ultimately more important to you than anything this world has to offer. Can you see where we are and where we want to go? Can you see how to get there? Can you envision that 2020 vision of this year that we're dealing with? Where do we want to go from here? When it's all said and done, I want to go to heaven from here. Don't you? We don't accomplish that by works, but we do by faithfulness and faith. And God, by His grace, gives us the opportunity. We got couples, families seated among us now that we hope are going to take the leap of faith with us soon and be identified with this church. We're going to grow. We're going to have more talent. We're going to have more opportunities, and God's going to bless. But today, if you've not really jumped in, if you've not given yourself yet to the fellowship that is needed, we beg you to think about where you're going. Because if you're forsaking the assembly, if you're not giving as you could, if you're not teaching your friends and your neighbors, you're taking an awful chance. Where's that going to take you? If you're living like the world all week long and still coming to church, where's that going to take you? I don't have to spell out the 4-letter word, do I? Where are we going from here? Friends, if you've never obeyed the gospel of Jesus Christ, the scriptures make it clear that if you don't accept Jesus as Lord, repenting of sin, believing in Him with all your heart, confessing your faith, and being buried with Him in baptism, there's just one place. I'm not condemning anybody to hell, but I'm telling you the scriptures say there's just one way. I am the way, the truth, and the life. That's the direction Jesus gives. Where are you going? If you need to respond to the invitation of the Lord today so you can be sure you're going to heaven, while we sing this song of encouragement, we urge you to come right now.